there's an assumption there that it is good in the DEI statement, and it's not necessarily the belief shared by all folks. So it implicitly weeds out people who do not share the same beliefs. And again, in the irony of things, DEI statements in an attempt to foster inclusivity do exactly the opposite by excluding folks. After the testimony of the university presidents before Congress in December, one of which, of course, was from the now former president of Harvard, Claudine Gay, Harvard, amongst many others, got bashed for a lot of the things that they do, for lack of a better way to say it, in this case. And what was interesting, of course, to watch at that time was, and actually even now, was how the majority of academia reacted to the backlash and the push against Harvard and others that was demonstrably felt. There was no self-reflection, well, maybe we screwed something up, how can we be better about this? None of that. More so it was a just continue to carry on as though nothing were wrong kind of thing, and, you know, decry the backlash as just coordinated smear campaign, things like that. But there have been a few that have chimed in to point out serious problems that do have negative influences. And one of them has been, you know, one of the things we've talked about so many times on this channel, the DEI statements, and particularly the mandatory ones, but DEI statements generally. And so that's we come back to what now appears in the Harvard Crimson, which is the newspaper of Harvard, from Professor Randall Kennedy, who is one of the law school professors. Their mandatory DEI statements are ideological pledges of allegiance. Time to abandon them. Because Randall Kennedy is also on the Council on Academic Freedom at Harvard, and so he talks at length about this. But of course, why do I talk about these things? Well, this is where we train the next generation of scientists, of course, and so what goes on at a university does have a long-term effect upon what will happen in scientific disciplines across the United States, and of course, because science is a global enterprise, as it were, globally also. And so it's important to get into some of these things. Of course, what is it about? What is it? The goal of science, of course, is the pursuit of the truth. As per the university, also, the pursuit of the truth is the prime purpose there. But that gets undermined when you have to force people and coerce people to take an ideological stance in a particular direction rather than pursue the truth, wherever it may take them. So let us talk a little bit more about that. On a posting for a position as an assistant professor in international and comparative education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, applicants are required to submit a CV, curriculum vitae for those who don't know, a cover letter, a research statement, 3 letters of reference, 3 or more writing samples, and a statement of teaching philosophy that includes a description of their orientation toward diversity, equity, and inclusion practices. Now, from the jump, do you get the sense that there is a bias toward a particular belief in how to work with students in some of these things? Anyway, at Harvard and elsewhere, hiring for academic jobs increasingly requires these so-called diversity statements, which Harvard's Derek Box Center for Teaching and Learning describes as being, quote, about your commitment to furthering EDIB within the context of institutions of higher education. Now, EDIB, for those who don't know, it's a variation on the acronym SOUP. With DEI, it means equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, if you're looking for an answer there. By requiring academics to profess and flaunt faith in DEI, the proliferation of diversity statements poses a profound challenge to academic freedom. A closer look at the Box Center's page on diversity statements illustrates how, for the purpose of showcasing attentiveness to DEI, the center suggests answering questions such as, how does your research engage with and advance the well-being of socially marginalized communities? Do you know how the following operate in the academy? Implicit bias, different forms of privilege, settler colonialism, systemic interpersonal racism, homophobia, heteropatriarchy, and ableism. How do you account for the power dynamics in the classroom, including your own positionality and authority? How do you design course assessments with EDIB in mind? And how have you engaged or led EDIB campus initiatives or programming? The Box Center's how-to page mirrors the expectations that DEI statements will essentially constitute pledges of allegiance that enlist academics into the DEI movement by dint of soft-spoken but real coercion. If you want the job or the promotion, play ball or else. Playing ball entails affirming that the DEI bureaucracy is a good thing and asking no questions that challenge it, all the while making sure to use in one's attestations the easy-to-parody DEI lingo. It does not take much discernment to see, moreover, that the diversity statement regime leans heavily and tendenaciously toward varieties of academic leftism and implicitly discourages candidates who harbor ideologically conservative dispositions. This is one... That's where this becomes important to talk about it. Is a lot of these things implicitly assume with these kinds of questions and what have you, that you share a particular set of beliefs. And that is not relevant to your position as an academic in these kinds of things if you're going after the truth in different matters and if that is your purpose. Now, if you're an activist, fine. But that's not the purpose here of university, or it's not supposed to be anyway. After all, I believe Harvard's own motto is Veritas, which is the Latin word for truth. And these kinds of things. So just as a note on that front, it is ironic here with Harvard. So that is the thing on this, is that it implicitly discourages, not explicitly, but implicitly discourages anyone, not just conservative, but anyone who doesn't share that belief pattern that is exemplified in those questions. Sorry, the cats just had a bit of a moment. It implicitly discourages any of those candidates from applying, from taking that job. Well, I'm not going to be welcome there. They're not going to want anybody who thinks differently about a problem than they do, is the implicit message that is given. So, in the irony of it, of course, in trying to be more inclusive of, diversity kind of thing, right? They're being inherently exclusive because of the implicit construction of that. So congratulations on that. You utterly failed. But the other thing with that is that to get the job then, some folks may want to play ball, but they'll just lie. We don't want to encourage lying about this stuff. Here, lying about your beliefs on these different things just to get a job. It's not helpful at all. In addition to exerting pressure toward leftist conformity, the process of eliciting diversity statements abets cynicism. Detractors reasonably suspect that underneath the uncontroversial aspirations for diversity statements, facilitating a more open and welcoming environment for everyone, are controversial goals that include the weeding out of candidates who manifest opposition or show insufficient enthusiasm for the DEI regime. Detractors also reasonably object to what they see as a troubling invitation to ritualized dissembling. A cottage industry of diversity statement counseling, in quotes, has already emerged to offer candidates prefabricated boilerplate rhetoric. Noticed a couple of those actually appearing online. And so that's one thing I wanted to mention with that. But, because you're going to have that, it's sort of cheating kind of things. And I bet you, I don't encourage it given what has happened with peer review, but I would take a wager that some professors and folks trying to seek a position but don't want to commit to this stuff will turn to ChatGPT to write it for them. Because then they don't have to write it themselves, to be honest. They don't have to deal with this bull crap involved in it. So, and it does abet cynicism. Nobody, I think, disagrees with the idea of having a more welcoming and open environment to have folks there. Nobody disagrees with that, I think. But when your point of inclusion is to include people who think like you, that's not really being welcoming to everyone. That is implicitly weeding out people who don't share your own beliefs. And that's not helpful to the pursuit of the truth. Gina and I just did for Rogue Journal Club, and that episode will be out soon, a review of an article called The Epistemic Benefits of Ideological Diversity, One of which actually is, when you have ideological diversity, one of which is actually increased public trust. Very interesting article. I some mild critiques that we both had of it, but very, very interesting article, and you guys should listen to the Rogue Journal Club episode when that comes out. But, it's also another thing in that it actually helps you to get at the truth and countervail any biases therein. Because people do have their biases, but if you're including only people who share all the same bias, well, then you're going to be missing something in your pursuit of the truth. And in teaching students that also. Candidates for academic positions at Harvard, and anywhere really, should not be asked to support ideological commitments. Imagine the howl of protest that would or should erupt if a school at Harvard asked a candidate for a faculty position to submit a statement of their orientation towards capitalism or patriotism or making America great again with a clear expectation of allegiance. Such pressures constitute an encroachment upon the intellectual freedom that ought to be part of the enjoyment of academic life. That would be just as wrong. It would be just as wrong. Demands for DEI statements are also counterproductive to efforts to undo the effects of long overlooked invidious social discriminations in academia. It is important to remember that the DEI ethos did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from a laudable determination to free academia of attitudes and practices that impeded potential contributors for prejudicial reasons, thereby depriving institutions of higher learning of useful talents. Universities are under a legal, moral, and pedagogical duty to take action against wrongful discriminatory conduct. But demands for mandatory DEI statements venture far beyond that obligation into territory that is full of booby traps inimical to an intellectually healthy university environment. Yes. By overreaching, by resorting to compulsion, by forcing people to toe a political line, by imposing ideological litmus tests, by incentivizing insecurity, and by creating a circular mode of discourse that is seemingly impervious to self-questioning, the current DEI regime is discrediting itself. And it should. And it should. And it is, is really what it is. It's very, very much discrediting itself in this, but it would be hard to overstate the degree to which many academics at Harvard and beyond feel the intense and growing resentment against the DEI enterprise because of features that are perhaps most evident in the demand for DEI statements. I am a scholar on the left, committed to struggles for social justice. The realities surrounding mandatory DEI statements, however, make me wince. The practice of demanding them ought to be abandoned, both at Harvard and beyond. Now, I will also point out this was republished by Free Black Thought for you if you are on that membership board too. But anyway, the point here being that being forced to toe an ideological line like that breeds resentment. It doesn't belong in any job hunt. It doesn't belong in any applications for students. It sure as hell doesn't belong in grant funding for research, particularly if it's coming from a federal agency, which I believe, and Professor Kennedy is the professor of law here, so I would love to know his thought on this, because at least in Canada this has happened, where there have been such inclusions of DEI statements and requirements for certain actions related to DEI even, in order to get grant funding, which I find that absolutely despicable. And if we're done in the United States, I think is a clear violation of First Amendment law. Actually, the federal government does not have the right to force somebody to do that, and use the grant dollars as coercion to do that. So I do think it's a direct violation. But that is a whole other commentary there that might be saved for another day. And I would be curious to know Professor Kennedy's thoughts on that specifically, if that were to happen. I haven't quite seen that. Well, that's not entirely true. I've seen something related and pretty close to it with the peer plans from the DOE grants. But anyway, that's a whole other kind of commentary there. But all this to say, it's no surprise when trust is lost in an institution, when it does things like this, does things like DEI statements to enforce an ideological conformity implicitly. And we say implicitly, we should emphasize implicitly, because it's not like explicitly saying we don't want any of X person, person with X beliefs here. They're not saying it that way. They're saying it implicitly by the questions being asked, because it assumes in those questions being asked as part of a diversity statement that you share agreement with the basic premises of those questions. That such things are good, that they should be done, that this DEI as it is currently a good thing, and spoiler alert, it's not. But there's an assumption there that it is good in the DEI statement, and it's not necessarily the belief shared by all folks. So it implicitly weeds out people who do not share the same beliefs. And again, in the irony of things, DEI statements, in an attempt to foster inclusivity, do exactly the opposite by excluding folks who don't share the same beliefs, particularly when it's done the way that apparently the Box Center School has done. But bravo to Professor Kennedy, because I'm sure he and I would disagree on a whole bunch of other things, but that's totally fine in here. But I share his sentiment with DEI statements that they should just go and never be included, because a lot of us don't necessarily share the same beliefs as he does. Well, I may not share the same beliefs as Professor Kennedy, but a lot of us don't share the same beliefs that underlie the assumptions of DEI statements that are very leftist themselves, very much from one particular political persuasion. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button on the way out the door, comment on the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, all that lovely good jazz. Until next time, I'm Adrian. May you stay curious.